Maxim found this job in the city openings section on the back page of the local weekly. He glanced over the listing and paused. The Adonis restaurant is seeking a waiter. No experience required. We will consider any candidate, including part-time students. Preference is given to young people under 25, in good physical condition and free of bad habits. High pay guaranteed. For inquiries, please contact the address below. Maxim read aloud. He was doing this for the 5th time in a row, trying to grasp the intricacies of everything written. And indeed, there was much to ponder. Firstly, this was the first time Maxim had heard of a restaurant with that name, and this despite the fact that he considered himself a native of their quiet, provincial town. Secondly, why hire a waiter with no experience, especially a man? Are they going to have gladiator fights or something? Or pole dancing? Maxim asked himself. His answer was met with a pained sigh from the next room. Mom, what's wrong? Are you feeling worse again? Should I give you a shot or call Aunt Zena? Let her set up an EV, Maxim asked anxiously. No, son, no need. My head is already spinning from these medications. Alla Evgenievna replied. Maxim clenched his fists, realizing his own helplessness. For a year now, his mother has barely gotten out of bed, citing chest pain. The doctors shrugged their shoulders and complained about the poor ecology and the vile climate. You should take your mother to the sea, young man, at least for a month, and at most forever. The salty air can work wonders, you know, the general practitioner told the boy. If only the doctor had known at that moment that the young man standing before him was as poor as a church mouse. Max's father had died 7 years earlier in a car accident, and since then, he and his mother had lived alone. For this very reason, when he entered university, he chose to study part-time. This way, he could look after his ailing mother, study, and even earn a little extra money. After all, with each passing month, the cost of medications was increasing, and Maxim had to seriously consider finding a normal job. Unfortunately, this turned out to be much more difficult than he initially thought. That's why, when he saw an ad for a waiter, he chose it. What's so special about that, actually? I'm not going to work in a strip club. A waiter's not a bad job, by the way. Tips, a clean uniform. At least better than a janitor or a loader, Maxim continued to mentally persuade himself. And the longer he continued this internal dialogue, the more convinced he became of the correctness of his choice. The next day, Maxim rose early and, after drinking a cup of coffee, headed off to the interview. Having learned where her son was going, Alla Evgenievna said as she parted, "Son, just be careful. Aunt Zena says there's been an increase in missing persons in the city. Some are eventually found, but it's hard to identify them. They're so disfigured and torn apart." Maxim shook his head, but then finally answered, "Okay, Mom, don't worry. Who the hell would want me penniless?" The address listed in the ad turned out to be at the very edge of space. It was a large building with opaque windows, decorated with a trendy artistic paint job to enhance the appearance. A doorman stood at the entrance, looking like a cross between Stallone and Schwarzenegger. Maxim briefly explained the situation to the doorman and received detailed instructions on where to go next. Not 5 minutes had passed before the future waiter was already sitting in the Adonis restaurant manager's office. Grigory Semenovich Karlov glanced at Maxim curiously and said, "Well then, young man, let's get started, as they say. Our restaurant opened recently, a few months ago. We haven't fully staffed yet, as you understand, but we have a good client base, and most importantly, we're solvent. Do you understand what I mean? Yes, that's tips. We work around the clock. 2 shifts. Night shifts are especially preferred. If you have to work the night shift, you'll get triple pay. Be efficient and laconic at work. Don't ask unnecessary questions and be as invisible as a shadow. Well, that's all there is to it. I think I've explained everything more than clearly. Yes, I understand everything. The conditions are quite satisfactory. Tell me, what happened to my predecessor? Why did he quit?" Maxim asked cautiously. The restaurant director hesitated for a moment, then clasped his hands and said, "He didn't quit. Stepan died. Or rather, he was murdered. You know, there's a serial killer on the loose in town. Styopa was such a good guy. It's so upsetting. They ambushed him in an alleyway and killed him. The body was disfigured beyond recognition. I can't imagine who could have committed such atrocity. The entrails were scattered for several meters, and his face was completely gone. Either stray dogs gnawed them, or something." After the director's words, Maxim turned pale and felt his palms suddenly sweat. On the other hand, it was too late to back down, and the boy understood this better than anyone. And what was so special about his predecessor being killed by a maniac? He could have killed any other city resident with equal success. It was just a coincidence, nothing more. And so, gathering his courage, Maxim said, "I'm ready to get to work, Grigory Semyonovich. Everything suits me." As if on cue, a satisfied smile appeared on the director's face, like the grin of an alligator from the Florida swamps. "Well, that's all very well. Then I suggest you get to work right away. Put on your apron and shirt, and off you go. Oh, and you can bring your health certificate later. I can see you're absolutely healthy, Maxim," Grigory Semenovich said, shaking the newly hired waiter's hand. The young man's heart began to sing. Finally, they hired me. Now everything will be all right, thought Maxim as he walked to the locker room. At first, the job really did seem easy and straightforward to Maxim. Besides him, there were other waiters in the restaurant who, understanding the situation, took on the most difficult orders. The first day of work turned out to be surprisingly easy and simple, even though Max's legs were aching from being unaccustomed to it. It couldn't spoil his impression that he was now employed. Maxim, of course, wasn't left on the night shift, especially on his first day. So he went home with a clear conscience. It was still fairly light outside, and there was still an hour or two left before dusk. Longingly inhaling the fresh evening air, the young man slowly wandered toward the center But before he'd taken even 10 steps, a tramp sitting on a piece of cardboard, begging passers-by, called out to him, "Don't pass by. Give me a kopeck or a ruble." The beggar croaked, extending a dirty hand to Maxim. The young waiter tried to pass by, but the tramp proved persistent and, catching up with him, blocked his way. "Don't rush so much. Listen to what I'm telling you. You shouldn't have taken this job at this restaurant, man. Be extremely careful, especially at night." What was surprising was that the tramp's voice no longer sounded so nasal and disgusting. Maxim exclaimed in surprise, "How do you know I work in a restaurant?" But the tramp merely shook his head and walked away, continuing to mumble some nonsense. From the outside, it seemed the beggar was simply out of his mind, occasionally teetering on the edge of madness and sanity. "He's crazy, that's for sure," Maxim thought. Wincing with disgust, he involuntarily quickened his pace and hurried away from the crazy tramp. Trying to quickly forget the encounter with the beggar, Maxim concentrated his attention on the leaflets posted on lampposts and information boards. "Help me find... a guy's missing. He left and never came back. Wanted," the headline screamed, making Maxim look around again. The young waiter knew that for some time now, people had been disappearing in the city. Mostly, the mysterious killer's victims were young men and women around Maxim's age. Some were found torn to pieces, others vanished without a trace. Yeah, this city is more like a maniac's hunting ground, Maxim thought with a shudder and quickened his pace. Returning home, Maxim quickly told his mother about his first work shift and went to bed. Tomorrow, a new day awaited him, which, surprisingly, turned out to be similar to the previous one. Again, a lot of running around the restaurant in the spirit of fetch and serve. The work, of course, wasn't difficult, but it still bothered Max a little. Moreover, already on the second day of work, he noticed some oddities. As it turned out, meat was only delivered to the restaurant at night. Furthermore, private dinners and banquets for which large sums of money were paid also took place around midnight. These customers are strange. Can't they eat during the day or something? Why do they have to stuff their intestines at night? Maxim thought to himself. He even tried to ask his partner this question, but he only shrugged sullenly and avoided answering. But that wasn't the only thing that worried Maxim. The guy really didn't like the beggar who continued to sit across from the restaurant, begging for alms. It seemed to Maxim that the tramp was behaving strangely, to say the least. Every time the waiter left the restaurant, the beggar stared at him wide-eyed, as if wanting to burn a hole in him with his gaze. Meanwhile, people continued to disappear in the city. The number of wanted posters grew, but the police did nothing. Some people seemed to vanish into thin air, while others' mangled remains were found. Trying to find the killer, the police were ready to blame anyone, even stray dogs, who allegedly tore the bodies of late-night passers-by to pieces. The animals were, of course, captured, but the murders and disappearances didn't end there. Business was good at the restaurant itself, and Max had managed to settle in nicely. The only thing that upset the young man was that they stubbornly refused to transfer him to the night shift. After all, that's where the pay was apparently significantly higher. Maxim had already asked to work the night shift twice and was refused. The director explained that he didn't have enough experience yet, and the night customers appreciated the superior service and comfort. Grigory Semenovich's answer struck Maxim as odd. Something's clearly wrong here. What if I check it out tonight? I'll quietly approach the restaurant and see what kind of meat they're bringing in and what kind of customers they have, Maxim thought to himself, and mentally made his decision. He was so confident of the success of his plan that he didn't even tell his mother where he was going that night. He decided to approach the restaurant, not from the front entrance, but through the vacant lot that led to the back door. A full moon shone in the sky, and as he approached the building, the boy felt a strange excitement. And suddenly, when he was only 150 meters from the restaurant, Maxim saw a truly incredible and terrifying sight. Squatting in the vacant lot in front of the restaurant was someone who only vaguely resembled a human. Yes, it was some kind of creature, nothing less. Its vile, slime-covered body was completely devoid of fur or any other vegetation. It was much larger than a human, and by the most rough estimates, was about 2 meters tall. The creature had long, sinewy, monkey-like limbs, ending in what looked like webbed fingers. Maxim couldn't see the creature with his night vision, but they were hardly more pleasant than the rest of its vile body. The creature sat almost motionless, occasionally emitting a nauseating chomping sound that echoed for several meters in the night silence of the wasteland. Maxim, in a state of shock and bewilderment, shifted slightly to the left to examine the strange creature from a different angle. But then a branch snapped treacherously under his foot. The creature turned its head sharply and almost immediately saw Maxim frozen. The creature stood up on his hind legs, and the young waiter realized exactly what it was doing in the wasteland. Beside the creature lay a part of a human body, most likely a gnawed ribcage. And now, meeting the eyes of the night entity, Maxim realized he had to run. They took off almost simultaneously, but unlike the boy, the creature moved in enormous leaps. Maxim ran without looking where he was going, cursing himself for his blunder and overconfidence. Why on earth did I even go to this restaurant in the middle of the night? Flashed through his mind. Maxim was just beginning to believe he'd escape when he suddenly tripped over a brick lying in the road. This was enough to send him sprawling on the asphalt, his elbows and knees bleeding. The snarling creature leaped onto his back with all its might, intent on feasting on fresh human flesh. But she didn't have time to sink her fangs into Maxim, because a man suddenly jumped out of the nearby bushes and sprayed a jet of caustic gas from a canister into the creature's face. The nightmarish creature roared and backed away, trying to wipe the stinging mixture from its muzzle. Then the creature leaped to the side and a second later disappeared into the sewer, the cover of which had apparently been missing for a long time. Still breathing heavily, Maxim rose from the ground and looked at the stranger who had saved him. Suddenly, the man's face seemed familiar to the waiter. Of course, it was the same homeless man who had been begging. "What, you recognized him? I told you not to go into that restaurant," the tramp said with a smile. Surprisingly, his voice no longer sounded nasal and didn't evoke any disgust. Still not understanding what was happening, Maxim looked at the tramp and noticed with horror that his face began to change before his eyes, transforming into something terrible and incomprehensible.